I've been doing a lot of talk about a good workbench in the last few months, but if you really don't have any desire to build one, how about a bench in a box? Today, let me show you a table you can order online and have shipped to your house that I think is worthy enough to be put in any workshop. Today, I'll be reviewing the Vevor table. It has a solid wood top and has a 3,000 pound load capacity. After ordering the table saw off the website, this was the surprise that awaited after return home. The entire bench came in a 6-inch thick box. I was skeptical. If we take everything out of the box, this is what we're left with. It really is a simple table that anyone can put together. All holes for the included screws are pre-drilled so that all you have to do is insert the screw and drive it in. The very first question you should be asking as you watch this, is that real wood? After all, if you're going to be hammering on the surface of it, if you're going to be adding a vise to it, if you're going to use clamps to hold down a project, it better be able to handle it. This is actually a material called rubber wood, but don't stop watching the video yet. Thank you. When I first saw the rubber wood tag that came with it, I thought I'd gotten a cheap sticker veneered bench with a plastic core. But if we go to the wood database, we can see that it is a real wood species that's native to Brazil, but you'll also find it in tropical areas throughout Asia. Its Janka hardness is 960 pounds force. Since the bench I've done most of my work on is at 620 pounds force, I'm really happy with this. Of course, it is below the 1220 pound force of red oak, but it will still take a beating. To put this thing together, everything you need comes with the table. As I said a little bit ago, the holes are all drilled as well. This means you're not measuring anything and you're simply moving the legs into position and adding screws. I used a hand drill with a long Phillips bit to quickly put mine together. Next, you'll add the front and back aprons. Each of the legs are tapped and they give you a full set of button head bolts to easily attach the aprons. Button head bolts are great as they're tapered and feel clean when you install them. To make everything more stable, the aprons will be attached to the top of the table as well, using the same size screws used for each of the leg sets. I did find that some of the holes were slightly off, but I used a small drill bit to add a hole to correct things. Next, we'll add the power cord. It's optional if you're looking for a standalone table, but it's nice if you've made your bench an island and you find you're constantly tripping over all the power tools that you've plugged in. Having a single wire that can be hidden on the floor with a cord cover makes this a better option. To install it, you just pull it through the leg apron and use a couple machine screws to lock it in place and a set of tapped holes. This table comes with 2 different ways for it to sit on the floor, either by 4 wheels or 4 heavy-duty steel feet. If you have a garage and you're moving your car in and out, the wheels are the way to go. My last garage was like this and I would have been really happy to have been able to roll my bench out of the way instead of folding it against the wall every night. The wheels or feet attach to a sliding tube that will allow you to raise or lower your table. I really can't imagine anyone not being able to find a height that's perfect for them. The table can be set between 28 and 39.5 inches. I'm 6'1" and the rule of thumb is for the workbench to come up to the thumb knuckle joint, which for me would be about 35 inches, but I like having mine slightly taller at about 39 inches, and it works great on this bench. One thing that I do really like about this bench is that it's easy to level the legs, which works really well with my uneven floor. If you find that your table's rocking or that it's not even with your floor, and again, my floor is terrible, you can either twist the wheel or the foot to where it needs to be, and we'll just tighten it to the bottom of the leg. And now I can lock it, and I'm good to go. Easy. There are peg holders that can be connected to both sides, but we'll talk about that more in a little bit. That is pretty much the entire build. Mine came together in less than an hour with the help of my son. So now the question is, how durable is it? Well, it does say that it has a 3,000 pound load capacity, but this really means nothing in my shop. I think the most my 2x4 bench has had on the top of it is my own weight, so the 3,000 pound load capacity to me is just a number. But if you plan on putting a car on the top of yours, then I guess this is something that might interest you. No, the real question is, how stable is it? Workbenches require sawing, moving as you push things on top of it and take things off. If you're doing chisel work, do you want it to sway as you swing a mallet? This is where I have a problem with this table. If we hold onto the front corner, I can move it back and forth. It may be able to hold a lot of weight, but it suffers due to the way it's designed. I've got a block underneath one of my legs, but if we go to the leg, we can see that because it does extend up and down, there is going to be a little bit of play. A little bit of play on one is going to multiply throughout the entire table. But if we connect all of the legs together, we have a much better chance of this being much more stable. A good bench has a stretcher or two on the base, which helps to stabilize both legs. This workbench, unless firmly attached to a wall, is not going to have that stability. This might be a deal breaker for you, but let's consider this. With my first bench I made years ago, I created a set of rolling columns that allows me to organize screws, bolts, and other items. I attached this bench to my wall and it is rock stable. I'll go ahead and pull these out. As you can see, the table is very much open like the Vevor table. Before I attached this to the wall, it was very flimsy and it had a hard time holding itself together, but I built this on purpose because I knew I was going to add those shelving. So if you want to do the same kind of setup that I've done here, this is perfect for it, but you will have to attach it to a wall. Otherwise, the table will do a little bit of wobbling with it open like this. But if you're using the wheels or this is an island in your workshop, this is not a great setup yet. We can make it better. So let's do that now. The best way that we can improve this is by adding a shelf to the bottom, which would give us stretchers and a much needed table to put things away, like any jigs you might have. We'll make a quick shelf out of 3 construction grade 2x4s. First, we'll measure widthwise from the outside of both leg extensions. We'll cut a couple boards to size and clamp them onto both ends of our bench legs. Now we'll measure from the inside face of both sides, and then cut both stretchers to size. We'll drill a hole that's closest to the base legs, which will allow us to attach the shelf without modifying anything. Loosen the clamps and we'll lay out the entire shelf on the top. I used 8 drywall screws to assemble the box. We'll use the holes we started earlier as a template to drill into the leg stretchers. If someone's nearby to help hold it up, grab them, but since nobody's awake at 4 a.m., I used a ratchet strap. Now we'll add 4 lag bolts with washers to attach the base to the table. You really need to make sure at this point that there's no gap between the shelf and the legs. Adding a couple cross members in the center will finish the frame. This is a really important part. We need to measure between the base legs and get the exact distance. Melamine's shelving is nearly the exact width and size I needed, and yes, it makes a better shelf than a bench top. After it slides in, and it should be tight, we'll attach it to the frame. This will make sure that the upper legs are all tightened and secured to the leg extensions. This is before we added the base, and this is after. There's still a little bit of flexing, but this to me is adequate for this table. And if we come back to my table that I built a few years ago, with the wheels on the bottom, it does a little bit of rolling, but it's never really bothered me with my work. Since when I made my very first workbench 25 years ago, I've always had an edge on my workbench. It's important because you want to be able to clamp things down that you're working on. And yes, a holdfast will work, but it's really nice to be able to use a set of clamps across the surface. I've got the Vevor bench flipped upside down and you can see that there really isn't any place that I can clamp anything to. The steel stretcher here makes it impossible for me to clamp onto something. I found if you take a 2x4, it will fit inside of the stretcher here, this lip. So I suggest adding a 2x4 along the entire inside. Now the problem that you're gonna run into is that it's not gonna fit because of the screw heads. So we'll put it inside as much as we can, and then we're gonna use clamps along the entire surface, which will leave little indentations in the wood, and we'll drill those out with a Forstner bit. We'll see if this slides in, and we're good to go. To attach this, I'm just gonna use a few 2-inch drywall screws. Let's go test it out. And we are good. Another thing that a bench needs, at least in my opinion, is a dog hole next to the front edge. Even if you're not using a holdfast, there are a number of add-ons that easily attach, even if you only have a single hole. I took a 4x4 and I cut it down to size so that I know that it's square, and I've attached it to my drill press table. Now, I'm using a solid drill bit. That way I can use this as a template. You can't really use a Forstner bit to do this. I'm gonna drill most of the way out till I reach the end, flip it over, and then drill the other way. This has to be one of the smoothest brad point drill bits that I've ever used. I'll leave a link in the description for it. I like to have my dog holes about 2.5 inches away from the edge. So 2.5 inches is going to be right about here. So I'll place the brad point bit inside that hole. And now I can clamp this down. And that is a clean hole. One thing that I will recommend is that the 2x4 below needs to be opened up a little bit more. So you want to have more than just that 3/4 of an inch. When you use a holdfast, you're much better off with a thinner table than a thicker one. So having that 2x4 down below is going to make it a little bit too thick for the holdfast to really work really well. Let's see if I can put my quad vise in here that I built a few months ago. Perfect. As I said earlier, Vevor added a bag full of pegboard hooks that easily attach to holes that have been drilled into the face of the leg supports. Personally, I'm not a fan of these hooks. I don't like pegboard hooks of any kind, so I'm very biased against pegboard. But let's say you want to use this on an island and don't want to walk over to your wall every time you need something like a screwdriver. This table can easily adopt the shadow box method. With the shadow box method, I can create any shape that I want that will fit all of my tools. And the holders that I make don't come off when I try to pull off the tool. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna ditch the pegboard concept altogether. I bought a 2x4 piece of plywood, maybe cost me $10 altogether, and I'm gonna section a piece of this off and I'll show you what I'm gonna do with it. I went ahead and cut some shapes. These are just 1x4s. I added a 3/4 inch hole, but I didn't go all the way through. I've got a piece of conduit. This is, I think, a 5/8 conduit. This bar will go straight through like this. I've marked around each one so I know exactly where it goes. If I take off the tape backing, you can see I've already drilled some holes so I know on the other side where this is gonna connect. I'll go ahead and attach this. And now I'll flip it over. The nice thing about this is I can go ahead and stick this on the pegboard and drill a screw right through the back side of it. So we'll go ahead and do that now. I've got some number 8 1/2 inch screws. I'm just gonna go ahead and put it through the holes. As you can see, I've got my screwdrivers here. I've got my hold downs, I've got clamps, I've got pliers. And the nice thing about this is that if I want to add something later on, it's really easy to do even by leaving it on. Every shop needs a bench, even if it's throwing an old door over a set of sawhorses. When I started out, I made a foldable pine frame bench with melamine thrown over the top. But the biggest problem with doing these types of minimal designs is not having a bench that's flat across the surface. I did a lot of glue ups on the concrete floor as well as on my table saw table, as I was never really happy with the surface of my melamine bench. I like the surface of this as it's flat and accurate. The steel frame is strong and stable and does keep things parallel. If you're swinging a mallet with any kind of chisel work, a heavy bench top is far more efficient than plywood and will absorb more of the blow. Overall, if you're not interested in spending a lot of time and money on making your own, this is a good baseline bench. Being able to roll it around and out of the way in smaller shops is something I would have loved to have been able to do with my first workshop. Vevor reached out to me and gave me some discount codes that I've left in the description if you are interested in this. But let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. It means the world to me that you're here. I'd like to thank my patrons for their support and invite you to become a patron yourself. Thank you. Michelle B., Keith Current, William L McNally, Jerry Adams, Zach Finch, Rich Lightfoot, Tutor the Barbarian, Mike Lornitis, Les N, and Gary G. Hit the thumbs up, subscribe, and ring that bell. And I thank you so much for being a part of my shop. Please leave a comment below. Come find me on Instagram at MakeThingsWithRob. And remember to keep making things.